I'm not denying that there's problems that arise out of wedding planning, but I want them to be worth talking about. I think that they're worth talking about. I think that almost everything that comes up in conflict during wedding planning is related and tied to something deeper underneath. And this is just the perfect time to make meaning out of these arguments.
Loverly presents the Wedding Podcast, a show for those on the road to ideal. From relationship advice to wedding planning tips, we break it down. I'm your host, Kelly Khalil, bride-to-be and the founder of Loverly, a DIY wedding planning platform. Over the years, we've helped tens of thousands of couples get down the aisle. And now that it's my turn, I'm not holding back. I'm bringing in my besties, wedding pros, and some brides-to-be you may know to talk through everything from picking the perfect venue to mastering your relationship. It's time to plan smarter so you can focus on the happily ever after. You've got the ring, we've got the rest. Relationship counseling, therapy, premarital counseling sometimes has a stigma around it. And this week's episode, we are going to talk about why it's so important to invest in your relationship, have difficult conversations, and really focus on building strong communication between you and your partner. We have a mental health counselor and the founder of AisleTalk, Landis Bejar, on the podcast. She works with couples on their way down the aisle to help them deal with a lot of the stresses of wedding planning and all of the emotional issues that pop up along the way. Let's get into it. Landis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this is a topic that I feel like comes up every single time I meet a new bride-to-be. And the data shows it on loverly.com based on the articles people are clicking on. When they're signing up, we ask them what's their stress level. And for whatever reason, wedding planning overwhelms people, stresses people out. I have my thoughts on why that is, but that's your business, right? Is working with couples managing this stress. So would love for you to just give us a quick background on you. How did you get into this? And, why is wedding planning stress and anxiety such a problem?
Well, thank you again for having me. Wedding stress is probably my favorite topic to talk about. So I am the founder of a counseling and therapy practice called AisleTalk. I am a licensed mental health counselor from New York, and I work with people who are stressed out planning their wedding or looking into premarital counseling. And the idea for that was born from the professional side and the personal side, sort of simultaneously. I had graduated in New York from Columbia, getting my master's in counseling psychology, and I was practicing and working with a wide range of folks, kind of every sort of mental health disorder and diagnosis under the sun. And I was at a stage in life where many of us find us at one chapter or another, where it seems like everybody around us is getting married. And that included myself. So I had gone through the process in 2016 and planned my own wedding. And I think coming from my background in psychology and counseling, I noticed that this phase of life, or this endeavor that we all embark upon, really kind of felt like a pressure cooker for stress, and some strained family dynamics, put a lot of stress on partnership, things like that. And for me, I kind of went through the process and I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. It was, engaging my creative side. I thought it was really fun, but and I have a really good relationship with my in-laws too, which I know is, not the case for everybody, but I still encountered stress. And it seemed like it was really specific to, what we were trying to make happen with this wedding. And so I kind of noted all that. I thought it was sort of interesting, given my background and my, professional interests, but nothing ever came of it until I found myself about a year after my own wedding, wedding dress shopping with my sister-in-law. And I know that your story, starting Loverly, kind of harks back to some wedding planning with your sister, and sort
It
of
was
born
like
out
the
of this
secondary
real
stress.
need. Yes, exactly. Where you're not in it yourself, but you have this like very close vantage point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so our story was that we were in the wedding dress salon, and my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law kind of got into a spat about, a comment that my mother-in-law made. And being a family therapist, I couldn't help but jump in and try to smooth things over, mediate, get everyone to kind of see eye to eye. And then when everything was all said and done, I thought it was really interesting because I've been shopping with them a zillion times, and they have, funny banter back and forth. Nothing's off limits. They always kind of, quip back and forth with each other. And we never had a reaction like that. I never saw anything between them like that. And so it sort of occurred to me that there's something really special and or intense about this particular shopping experience.
Mm.
With shopping for this dress, this was the most special dress, and it meant so much, and there was some sort of pressure on it that led to a spat like this. But meanwhile, my mother-in-law sort of joked to me, good thing we brought the therapist along with us. We needed that. You should be a wedding therapist. And then I said, wait a second, is that a thing? And it turned out it wasn't. And that was
But it
six
needed to
years
be.
ago. And I decided, I had been through it myself. I had all these conversations before, and everything sort of came together. And I said, there needs to be somebody in this space.
Well, I think most businesses that start out of like that personal experience, they have a
Hmm.
different level of passion tied to it because you're like you have the pain point that you're trying to solve. But I think it's a universal
Hmm.
pain that people go
Hmm.
through. And I call it pain. Maybe it's not pain, it's stress, it's anxiety, however it manifests for different people. And like I said, I have my own point of view on why it's so
Hmm.
prevalent, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective as somebody who is working with couples, right, as
Hmm.
they're on their way down the aisle. Like, what do you think are the main themes that you're seeing as to
Hmm.
the catalyst for this wedding stress?
Yeah, I mean, kind of covers everything under the sun. But I would say that some things that kind of rise to the top are a lot of family issues.
Mm.
I think that we're living in a time where it's we've made a transition, but we're kind of in two camps at the same time, where previous generations were all about this is a family event. Usually parents were planning the wedding for their children, previous generations. And so that generation is still the parents of now our generation, who's our message has been completely different. This is to make it our own, and this is all about what the couple wants, and this is making it special about the couple. So a lot of times we get into dynamics with our family where they have so many expectations, that they're going to be a part of this, or this is what it should look like, or things like that. Meanwhile, the couples who are getting married are, this is about us, and these are our choices, and this is meant to reflect our love and our partnership, and we want to make it unique and special, not traditional. So you have a lot of sort of mismatched expectations, and a lot of just expectations about what things should be. Um, so family dynamics, in-law dynamics come up a lot. We also have partnership stress, right? You're doing a big major life decision, and with any sort of life decision or life transition comes stress that's so natural, that's so important, even to making that transition sort of intentionally and thoughtfully. But we have been this sort of societal expectation that we're supposed to be so happy during this time. And if we have a fight with somebody or if we have a disagreement, we don't see eye to eye, or we're overwhelmed, then we're doing it wrong, you know? And so there's,
Mhm.
the pressure of just, planning an event that, many weddings right now are big, big events. And
Mhm.
then there's sort of the expectation that you should be happy during that time. And then there's sort of a life transition that's really underneath all of this that is inherently stressful. Think of any other life transition you've been through, a big move, a job, a career change, you know, changing jobs, moving cities, whatever it is. You've always gone through stress. It's never just, I'm so excited and nothing else. You're
Mhm.
mourning the loss of the place you used to
Mixed.
live. You're nervous about new responsibilities, whatever it is. And so much can come with that, and it should. That means you're doing it right, actually. But society would have us believe that if we're nervous or scared or frustrated or whatever it is, then, oh, something must be wrong. So there's that sort of
Mm.
pressure also.
How do you think social media has kind of impacted the planning process? Because from my perspective, I've just seen how just on our Loverly Instagram account, well, we have like
Mm-hmm.
700,000 plus,
Mm-hmm.
followers, and the DMs that we get, a lot of them around brides saying, "Hey, can you feature my wedding? I really want my wedding to be featured," because they're working so hard on it. And then you also see, brides, and I'm saying mostly brides because that's 92% of our audience. I know grooms are also very
Mm-hmm.
involved in the planning process, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even just almost making the event a full scale production. Like it starts to become, a social media content creation moment, or the pressure to have all of these, Instagrammable or social media moments that like raises the stakes. So I feel like that has had a huge impact on weddings. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it on mental health in general being
Mm-hmm.
impacted by
Yeah.
the amplification of social. But I'm just curious if that ever comes up with couples that you're working with.
Yeah, it really does. Sometimes it's more overt, people are coming in and talking about, the pressures of, making something unique or special or Instagram worthy or all of those things. And then sometimes it's more covert, and you just know that it's sort of something that's underlying the bigness of weddings now. I get asked a lot of times, why is there so much stress now? Why not before? And there's a couple of different reasons, but one thing I turn to a lot is the impact of our digital world and social media. One thing, in one way, I the shift. I was maid of honor for my sister in 2007, and I feel like her planning experience was so different, and it's not that long ago.
Mhm.
But you pick up a couple of bridal magazines, and you go to a couple of different dress salons, and you pick the one that you want, and you've kind of gone through the steps of it now. And I think that in some ways it's really special in so many ways, especially some of the ways that Loverly shows up is everything is, you have so many more ideas, right? There's not this like formulaic template that people can't
Oh,
relate
it's
to, or
information overload. Just like if
but
you
then
are on TikTok
mhm,
and the algorithm tags you as "I'm getting married," it's like
mhm,
you can't escape it. It's every and maybe even if you don't want
right.
to see it, it's like it's in your face all the time.
Right, totally. So, and on the one hand, you have so many more ideas, and it's so much more exciting than just picking up a few bridal magazines and just trying to pick fun accessories or whatever. But on the other hand, there is information overload, analysis paralysis. There's way too many decisions to be made. We're feeling stuck, we're feeling overwhelmed, and there's so many visual imprints about the options that you have, right? And how to be different, or how to be special, or how to stand out. That's a big message now, and I think it's really great because I am always encouraging my clients to come back to what's important to you and what tells your love story uniquely. But I think for some people, it's like, I want all of the things that are unique, and that's really hard,
Yep.
right? It's like I'm trying to help people kind of pick one or two things that feel really special, ignore the things that feel forced. Um, but sometimes people just want it all, and they want everything to be so unique and so, you know, artisan and all of that stuff, and there's so many imprints, visual imprints of what that could look like, whether that's social media like a Pinterest and inspiration, or an Instagram account that's inspiration, or it's just the access to people in our lives,
Mm.
right? So historically, in previous generations, you would go to a wedding and you'd see that wedding, right? And you'd say, oh, she had a
Yep.
great dress, she had a great, tablescapes and all this stuff. And that was your imprint, right? And the only people who saw that wedding were the people who were invited, or maybe a few extra
Hmm.
people who saw the photos afterwards. Now we see all of the weddings of all of the people that we've ever met in our lives. And we see the
And you
weddings
can
that
see
they
the
were
guest
tagged in.
photos.
Yes,
Exactly. It's like you can go on,
yes,
you can see a wedding, like, oh, this is pretty, and then start stalking all the guests, and now you know like what the guests were wearing and different angles and perspectives. It's like it's a real thing.
exactly, exactly. I have a funny thing that happened with me choosing my gown for my wedding is we went in, it was like my third shop, and we found a gorgeous dress, and my friends were all like, Landis, this is it, like we found the one, like look no further, how could you ever, and I was like, yes, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, but I was hesitating, and they said, what's wrong, something's wrong, what's wrong with it? I said, well, I saw this girl who I played soccer with in high school, and I think she had the same dress. I haven't spoken to her in 10 years at this point. And because it had been imprinted on my mind, this dress was no longer special, right? Because somebody else
Mm.
had it. Where, as if before social media, I would have never known that this girl had this dress, and this dress would have just been special for me. And that's okay, right? So I think that it plays a role in terms of the inspiration. We can have all of this, and the illusion that we can have all of it, because we can't, right? Because you can't, like,
Mhm.
it's not in your budget, or you're not getting married, on a you know, in a farm, in a barn, and you can't do that look, but you like that look, but you're getting married, in a hotel or whatever it is. And so it, it's hard to process, but then you also have the exposure and the imprints to all of these weddings of people in your network
Yep.
and their people.
You mentioned something that I think is one of the biggest triggers of all. You mentioned budget.
Mm,
And money, I think, is, first of all, something that people in general have a hard time discussing, confronting, addressing in general, right? Like, for whatever reason, our society doesn't, you know, encourage people to talk about how much they make and how much they save and how they spend, even though that's like a total normal thing to discuss. We don't talk about it in school, right? Our education
mhm.
system doesn't really prepare us for the real world. And so many people, from what I've seen, have a lot of fear, shame, anxiety, all of these emotions tied to money in general, right?
Yes.
And then take a big pool of it, right? The average budget is 30,000, that's the average. I know way higher and way lower. Um,
Hmm.
and that, I think, just that part of it can overwhelm people because now they have to have discussions about what am I willing to pay for insert 70 decisions, right? And
Yes.
if you're not comfortable with the talking about money and how much things cost, and maybe you don't have a lot of money, maybe your parents are paying for it, that power dynamic, maybe your partner makes more money than you, right? Like,
Hmm.
talk to me about the money problems that you hear about and how it rears its ugly head in the therapy conversations you're having with clients.
I would say that almost every discussion has an undercurrent of a budget conversation. And I would also say that almost everything everyone talks about in wedding therapy, and that's why I love this space and why I got into it and why I developed it, is because it's all the things that bring people into therapy for other points in their lives, but just happening in this really intense short period of time. And money is absolutely one of them. People would rather talk about sex and politics than money, and it
Mm.
is so taboo, and it's even more taboo for women who are oftentimes at the helm of the planning, right? Um, then you have the relationship with, if parents are involved, if families are helping pay, then there's a conversation of power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who does offering this money give me some sort of creative license over the decisions that are made?
It's funny because Jove Meyer, who is a phenomenal event designer and planner in Brooklyn, he
Mm-hmm.
was on a very early episode of the podcast, and he literally
Mm-hmm.
says, "Whoever pays has the power," and there is some truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
And even on like a lot of couples don't realize if a family member is paying for something and their name is on the contract and they
Mm-hmm.
sign the contract and they
Mm-hmm.
pay it, they literally are the client and they can make any decision they want to
Mm-hmm.
whether, to make that vendor do what it is that they want. And that is a lot of
Yes.
power that people either don't discuss or are afraid to
Mm-hmm.
avoid it altogether.
Mm-hmm. And the question is, the place where we get into problems is that power going to be abused, right?
Hmm.
Are people on the same page about where the power is,
Hmm.
right? So we have plenty of families who pay for weddings and say, this is your budget, do what you want, it's
Hmm.
your day. But we have a lot of people who say, I'm paying for this wedding, I get the final say. Or I'm paying for
Hmm.
this wedding, so I want this thing, right?
Hmm.
Um, and the extreme is where it's a problem, right? There are so many rich conversations to be had, and this is where so much of the work that we do is alleviating stress, yes, but also making wedding planning not just fun and frills and what making wedding planning meaningful, right? So you can actually enter into a really rich discussion with family members about money that's probably long overdue, or about power, or about expectations, right? If you're open to having this conversation, but so many people avoid it like the plague because it's so taboo in our culture.
And also, they want to avoid conflict because of this societal narrative. This is the happiest moment of your life. This is the
Exactly.
happiest time of your life. That you're not allowed to have conversations that may be in conflict or may be
Mhm,
uncomfortable. But
mhm,
what I hear you saying is that it's actually the perfect time to have these conversations that are
mhm,
uncomfortable and
mhm.
learn the tools to communicate and to advocate for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. My go-to budget advice is have the conversations early, open, and often, right? Come
Mm,
to the table with the involved financial parties and the decision makers and say, let's have a conversation about budget. That may be uncomfortable, right? I'm not going
mhm.
to sugarcoat that that's not uncomfortable in certain families. But better to be uncomfortable than having blowout
Avoid
fights
it. Yeah,
or
avoid it
avoid
and
it.
then, yeah,
Yes.
suppress it. And then, there's that
And then it
tension which
explodes.
builds. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because budget and money is such a topic, like you said, that's taboo. We actually did a whole video series on
Mm-hmm.
how to have the conversation, right? What
Mm-hmm.
questions to ask, even a
Mm-hmm.
framework, because oftentimes there's a lack of understanding about how much things cost, right? Like, hey, here's the
Mm-hmm.
average. Here's what's normal. It's normal to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for a photographer, right?
Mm-hmm.
For your mental health, it makes sense for a lot of people, especially if both couples are, working and don't have bandwidth to hire a planner to assist them, right? Just to
Mm-hmm.
get things moving along. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I'll link in the show notes to some of the videos that we created, and because it is such an important conversation.
A lot of times, a lot of stress can stem from the fact that, like, unlike other money stressors, this wedding thing kind of stands alone in our lives. So most of us have not planned a wedding before. So the
Correct.
prices that we're looking at are shocking. And that sort of underscores a lot of these conversations too, is that we don't have a lot of things to compare it to. We've never done this before. Things in wedding world look different than the
No
rest of the
context.
world. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. There's no context for these things. So that's an added layer with, and so that's where templates like this are so, so helpful.
You have to educate yourself. You have to give yourself context so that you can be informed when you're having these conversations and be not as emotionally attached to them. Because, like, hey, this is what it costs. This is what it takes to
Yes.
produce an event. And
Yes.
it's okay if you don't want to spend that much, right? And be
Yes.
comfortable saying, this is what's important to me. This is not important to me. Um,
Exactly.
Another trigger that I've seen as a huge, huge problem for a lot of couples is religion and
Mm.
ceremony and tradition. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think the modern couple has changed what, I
Mm-hmm.
think, I don't know how long ago it was, but it was very uncommon to, um, you know, date, let alone marry someone cross culturally or across different religions. And, you might have a family who's Orthodox Jew who wants everything to be kosher. And
Mm-hmm.
then you may have a Episcopalian partner whose family
Mm-hmm.
wants to have a priest at the ceremony, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
this can become a huge stressor. And I'm
Yes.
curious, what's your advice to navigate that?
Yeah. So that's another topic that people bring in all the time is blending different cultures, religions, races, lots of different things that you're bringing in different backgrounds. And the thing about a wedding is that you could be living your lives in this beautiful intercultural relationship day to day and either not have a problem, or you've worked through a lot of stuff and you're here and you're celebratory and all those things, and it rarely comes up. But then you're planning a wedding, and people really view weddings as sort of like an emblem of things, right? Either it is a milestone in our religion, or it is, a celebration or a holiday almost that, even though we don't do these things day to day, there's an expectation from our family that we're going to, we don't ever go to church, but we want to get married, by a priest. We don't ever
Hmm.
celebrate this holiday, but I don't know, in Judaism, we're not super observant, but we should have a kosher wedding, that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
there's all of these observances, and expectations that families, or even couples might have for the wedding day, that might either families are surprising their couples, like their children, like, oh,
Hmm.
I didn't know this was important, or we needed to do this. Or sometimes partners are surprising each other, like, what, you never
Yep.
go to church, why are we getting married in a church, because something special about the
Hmm.
wedding, right? So a big part of the work that we do in these situations is to bring the couple together and first really build out your identity, your couple identity, around whatever the given thing is. So if it is religion, what is important to you about your religion, right? What are you guys, this is a really nice conversation to start to have in a premarital sense about what do you hope to cultivate in your new little unit that you're building out, whether that's just going to be the two of you, whether you're planning on having kids one day. um, what were your expectations there? Had you guys talked about that before? What is that? What do you want that to look like? So maybe they have given it some thought, and that can be a really great starting point. Or maybe it's like, okay, let's open up some of these conversations, because this is, if it hasn't happened yet, it's going to start, right? So
Oh, yeah. Kids are going to also accelerate that too. I feel like wedding is the first
exactly.
conversation. And then when you have a baby, from
Hmm.
what I've heard, it's like, well, are we going to baptize them or are we going to have a bris? Like there's all these things that come up. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, tradition, culture, rites
Hmm.
of passage in religions,
Hmm.
people are attached to them. Even if they don't
Yes.
live it in their everyday life, there's
Hmm.
some sentimental, nostalgic thing that
Hmm.
ma- people feel as part of their identity that they want to incorporate and include.
Exactly. And weddings and getting married is an opportunity for one of those rites of passage. And that's why we have these expectations. So we're facilitating conversations between couples where it's like, how do we relate to our religion, or, cultural piece in on a day-to-day level, and how do we want to relate to it for big life milestones, right?
Mhm.
Um, where are you guys on the same page, and where is there a difference, and how can we kind of work through some of that? If there are differences, let's make space to hear each other on why these things are important. Well, this really remember was super important to me as a child. It was, the place where I really connected to my family. It's something I want to pass down to our child because it underscores these values. Right now we're really getting into a good conversation about values, and usually partners are going to be really receptive to hearing that kind of language rather than, oh, we have to do it. My parents want to and they're paying for it at the end, right? Um, we can create a much more meaningful discussion if we open up some of these pathways and see, where we can kind of combine. And then we also need to look at what's at stake if we don't, right? If we
Mm.
don't involve this, right? That might be a really uncomfortable conversation with family. That might be a really devastating conversation with family. And then we're going to process what that looks like too.
I do find that a lot of couples that I speak to, they may be on the same page, they have the same values, they have the same vision, but it's their parents, especially for a lot of couples who are first generation, if their parents
Mm-hmm,
are immigrants and they're first generation and their parents have a
mm-hmm,
very different expectation of what a wedding celebration looks like, right? From the the religious portion, the traditions, who's
mm-hmm,
invited, who pays, and that a lot
mm-hmm,
of the conflict comes from the conversation with
mm-hmm.
the parents. And
Absolutely.
I experienced in my relationship early on, my mother-in-law and I have, or future mother-in-law and I have an
Mm-hmm,
incredible relationship now, but her and I are very similar.
mm-hmm,
And at first we had a lot of conflict because with my fiance, I had to say like, look, like your mom was number one before, right? But
mm-hmm,
like,
mm-hmm,
are you choosing me, right?
mm-hmm,
Like, where is the
mm-hmm,
boundary, right? Where is
mm-hmm,
the, and, um, now her and I have, like I said, an incredible relationship, but it wasn't about her and I. It was more that, you know, him and I did not have an established boundary between
mm-hmm,
what was our conversations and our decisions to be had and made and
mm-hmm,
us being
mm-hmm,
aligned on it, and where
mm-hmm,
and when his parents or my parents, had
mm-hmm,
a say to come in
mm-hmm,
and how that impacted our relationship. So, very difficult conversation to have, uncomfortable 6 weeks when I had to say, we need to take a break from your parents. They're coming over 3 days a week,
mm-hmm,
but we
mm-hmm,
recalibrated and we established that boundary. And now we have like such an incredible relationship where there's mutual respect because she now understands what I need to feel supported and listened to, and he more importantly understands
mm-hmm,
like, all right, I got your back. Like I get it, especially on issues with my mom. Like I'm aligned with
mm-hmm,
you. I'll support
mm-hmm.
you. And it sounds like it's conflict, but it's not. It's like it was actually a really big breakthrough we had in our relationship.
These are the types of conflicts that are healing and healthy, right? You can't have known that before. You couldn't have known that before, right? This you needed the friction and the tension to invite you into a conversation where you guys ended up closer. You ended up
Mm-hmm.
in a place where my favorite quote about boundaries is boundaries are the place where I can love both you and me simultaneously. If my boundaries
Mm-hmm.
too far away from me, then I'm not respecting myself and I'm going to feel resentful of all that you're taking from me. And if it's too far to you, then you're going to feel the same way towards me. But if it's right in the middle, then I can make space for myself and also make space for you. I can love you and me simultaneously. And that's how you've been able to have the best relationship with your in laws is finding the boundary.
Absolutely. I know a lot of religions, if you want to get married in a church or in a mosque or in a temple, just to name a
Mm-hmm,
few, there
mm-hmm.
are requirements for some level of premarital counseling, right?
Yes.
I
Mm-hmm,
know I was raised Catholic. My brother and sister both decided to have their weddings in a Catholic church, and so they had to
mm-hmm.
go through. I think it may have been even like a 4 month counseling
Yes.
program.
Mm-hmm,
So, for couples who are deciding not to, get married with, a religious kind of integration,
mm-hmm,
they're missing out on this premarital counseling.
mm-hmm.
Why would you advocate? I mean, obviously, we talked about all these triggers, but what do you think are the most important things for couples to know about premarital counseling and conversations and why they should prioritize it?
Well, this is like something that really excites me about what we do at AisleTalk, because when I was, the idea was born out of, wedding stress. But as we're kind of developing the idea, it that I wanted that to extend to some sort of secular premarital counseling offering as well. Because I think so many more couples do not have that built into, aren't affiliated with any sort of religious institution. They've probably heard what I hear a lot is that I've heard of premarital counseling, but I'm not religious or not part of a church or not part of a synagogue, and I just don't know how to access it. But it sounds wonderful, so that's where we can offer sort of this, non-religious but still very important facilitation of conversations to have before you're doing this big life transition, before you're making this big commitment, before you're signing on for, forever till death do us part. And I feel like that's where, religion has a lot of issues across the board, but this is where religious institutions have really gotten it right. They said, do not sign up for forever until death do us part unless you really know this person and you know their values and you know that you want to make life decisions with this person for a long, long time. Um, and I think the biggest part is you don't know the conversations to have if you don't know them, if you haven't been there, right? If you haven't
Mhm.
been married before, a lot of times you don't know what to talk about, right? Maybe at best you had a friend go through something hard and you turn to your partner and say, wait, okay, how do you feel about that? We need to talk about that. We need to get on the same page, But if you haven't been down this road before, you might not know what kind of questions to ask. Our providers are certified in prepare enrich model of premarital counseling. And so it's similar to what's offered through Catholic Church, but without the religious framework. And we go through topics like family planning, finances, um, sex and intimacy, communication, conflict resolution. If you haven't been through all of these things, you might not know how to have those conversations. You might not know what questions to ask. You could be the most attuned couple that we've ever met, and you might, not just know what questions to ask. And so a lot of our premarital counseling sessions start with, we're really great. We're making this decision, but we want to make sure we're asking all the right questions. We want to know we're having the right conversations to commit to this, commitment. Because if anything, it's more important than it was, back in the day. We we didn't have a lot of divorce back in the day. It just wasn't a choice, right? So
Mhm.
you're just in it, you didn't might not have a lot of choice about who you married either. Now we have all the
Mhm.
choice. The only thing
Mhm.
that's going to keep marriages together is if you guys are on the same page and wanting to work at this, right? So let's give you a good foundation to start with. Let's make sure you're asking all the right questions and that you know how your partner feels about X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of value conversations around, all these different topics that you might just not have encountered yet.
So it's about asking the right questions and discussing topics that maybe you haven't thought of. What about with training? And I'm using training because that's just the word that's coming to mind, but
Yeah.
around conflict resolution because
Mm-hmm.
I'm very passionate about personal development, relationships. I mean, we've been engaged now 3.5 years, no wedding, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
really taking my time on the relationship part of things. Like the wedding's going to be awesome. Like I
Yeah.
have that down, but like
Mm-hmm.
really truly understanding myself and my partner and all of that is really important to me. It's something I'm personally passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Conflict resolution, how people fight, how they express themselves, communicate when they're unhappy,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's verbally or non-verbally, like they don't
Mm-hmm.
communicate. I
Mm-hmm.
find, probably is almost more important than anything of like how do you fight and how do you get through
Mm-hmm.
difficult conversations, difficult situations, because they're inevitably going to come up when you're talking forever, right? Or a long term
Yes.
commitment. Um, what kind of tools um, do you teach couples to communicate and to resolve conflict?
So yes, 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 1,000 times yes. The If you don't have communication in check, you got nothing. You
Mm-hmm.
can have, you know, a great home and adorable kids and great sex life, but if you can't talk about stuff, you're just doomed. It is, and my clients will say I'm a broken record because it always comes back to communication and how we communicate or how we don't communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, we have a lot of tools in our tool belt, and, there's, some pieces that we could get into, but I think that a lot of times where the work starts, which is maybe helpful for our conversation, um, is just pushing back against some of like partnership and relationship myths that I think underscore a lot of where we stumble in our relationships. Things that come to mind along those lines are, um, if you love me, you should just know what I want without me having to say it. That's a
Mm.
big one that comes up, right? You should just essentially be able to read my mind and do what I want you to do. And that is one that time and time, first of all, it's still very, very present today in 2023. Couples are still operating under this premise that if you love me, I won't have to say it. I won't have to ask for my needs met, things like that. And that leads to so much conflict and so much unspoken conflict, which is even harder to deal with than spoken conflict, right?
Mm.
Um, Along those lines, so much avoidance happens, like we were talking about with the money conversation. So much avoidance happens to preserve not ever having any sort of uncomfortable conversation that it ultimately leads to something bigger, something deeper, something harder to get at, something that accumulates on top of each other. So having these conversations, even when they're uncomfortable, to uh, avoid the troubles caused by avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
Another myth that comes up all the time is, um, don't go to bed angry.
I knew you were going to
Sometimes,
say that. I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it because that thing, sometimes I just need a timeout. Like, I need a
yes.
timeout. I cannot deal with it. And it's funny because my fiance and I, like I said, I'm very into therapy, very into personal development. We worked with a prolific relationship counselor called Linda Carroll. She wrote the book Love
Mm-hmm.
Skills, and we took
I know the
her
book.
Love Skills course. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
I am.
Yes. So I think she's retired now, but we got to work with her last year. She's so
That's
awesome.
awesome.
One of the things that we learned was when you are in a fight, you go into the red zone. She calls it you're in the red zone when you're like angry, and no
Yep.
matter what you're going to say after that, it's like there's no logic, reasoning. It's just straight like all you see is red. So she taught
Mm-hmm.
us to say when we're like in conflict to say I'm in the red, and as soon as you say I'm in the red, it shuts down the
Game over.
conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and you need to take as long as you need
Mm-hmm.
to recalibrate. And for my fiance,
Mm-hmm.
literally, he's an Aries. He can have an explosion of
Mm-hmm.
emotion. And
Mm-hmm.
45 seconds later, he is like totally back to normal. Nothing happened. Me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like huffing and puffing for like a good 6 hours. Like I'm like
Yes.
steaming on something. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I have to go to bed angry to just
Mm-hmm.
process and then wake up and I'm back.
Yes, 100%. And there's an extension of that, which is just the point being that when we're there, when we're in the red, when our stress hormones are out of control, we're the neuroscience tells us we're operating from the animal part of our brain. We're not
Mhm.
operating from the human part of our brain. So we are only going to make it worse. We are not going to be able to have conversations. We are only going to be able to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And we have to give ourselves time to recalibrate and have a productive conversation. Sometimes that means it's late at night, so the break has to be bed. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's a break, I need a walk. Sometimes it's a break, I need to step outside and get some fresh air for 45 seconds, right? And then it's respecting each other's red, right? And it's honoring that you need 6 hours, I need 45 seconds. Um, But if you guys are both on the same page about what those breaks mean, the difficulty is a lot of couples who haven't done that work, their worst fear is that the break means that I'm leaving or we're done or this is
Mhm.
only going to get
Mhm.
worse. So we have to be on the same page about what a break means. It's not a I'm done with you. It's I'm done with this conversation. I need to pause. We need to revisit this when we're in a better state. So if you need to go to bed angry, go to bed angry. Sleep it off. Wake up with a clear head in the morning and have a better conversation about it. It's fine.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's trust in the relationship that even though we're having an argument and we're not aligned and we're having conflict, I trust that you will be around to work this out with me. That we're
Yes.
going to be able to figure this out. That you're in this. That you're committed to solving the problem. And that happens a million times in the wedding planning process, right? When there's a disagreement, like it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
need to be the end of the world because you're not aligning. It's just, hey, let's take a beat. Let's
Mm-hmm.
deprioritize that now. Let's come back to this when clear head, maybe full
Mm-hmm.
belly, because that's
Yes.
one of my tips. Like, make sure you're not
Yes.
hungry when you're fighting, because like you're either tired, you're hungry, you're lonely. There's all of these things that are
Yes.
factors for a fight that you need to be
Yes.
aware of.
Yes, make sure it's a good time to have an important discussion, right? When we have to have an important discussion at work, we schedule a meeting. And a meeting is only scheduled when it's not lunchtime, it's not 5 o'clock on Friday, it's not 8:30 on Monday. It's a time that we've all agreed upon that we're going to show up and not be tired, hungry, lonely, overwhelmed, otherwise engaged, distracted, etc.
I love that. Therapy, or the idea of therapy, for some reason still it has a little bit of a taboo attached to it.
For
Um,
sure.
One, because people think, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. There's an assumption that therapy means something is wrong.
Hmm.
Um, but from my experience, and I'm sure your POV is
Hmm.
that it's actually an investment in building a good foundation for a future, and that you
Hmm.
oftentimes people go to therapy once there is a problem, but the best thing I believe is prevention, right? Like
Yes.
get the tools when everything's great is the
Hmm.
perfect time to go to
Hmm.
therapy to strengthen a foundation or build a foundation.
Hmm. Hmm.
When you, I mean, obviously in your wedding planning therapy practice, it is a
Hmm.
prevention, right? But
Hmm.
I'm just curious in your previous career, what
Hmm.
percentage of people were coming to you preventatively versus shit just hit the fan, it's over, like get me out
Hmm.
of here.
Yes. In my previous settings, and and to a certain extent, while I'm still practicing today, and through AisleTalk, a lot of people use therapy and reach out for therapy in a more traditional sense, meaning I'm reaching out because I've hit rock bottom, some kind of rock bottom. Whatever that means to that person, and they're feeling, they might be feeling helpless or hopeless or whatever that looks like for them. Um, I love meeting people in this space because I'm not denying that there's problems that arise out of wedding planning and that they're that but I want them to be worth talking about. I think that they're worth talking about. I think that almost everything that comes up in when we're in conflict during wedding planning is related and tied to something deeper underneath, and this is just the perfect time to make meaning out of these arguments, right? It's so rare that the guest list or the seating chart is really just the guest list and the seating chart. It's so rare that a bridesmaid argument is really just about the color of her dress. It is almost always related and tied to something important about your life, or what you're sharing with your partner about, or what you're about to embark upon, that is worth talking about. And so sort of my underlying mission with AisleTalk is to normalize help seeking in times of stress and transition, right? You do not need to be hitting rock bottom to reach out for help, or to reach out for this particular kind of help, right? Which is unique. It's not calling your mom or your maid of honor or whatever, because sometimes you can't talk to them about this. You need somebody
Hmm.
neutral. And that's kind of where we show up and where we want to, sort of make it not so taboo. And we're trying to do that because, we're not your mother's therapy practice. We're showing up at, bridal shows and, on Instagram and things like that. We're not, hiding in the dark corners of the internet with the underlying assumption that, this should be a secret, you can, you can wear it on your sleeve.
Well, I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to have this conversation. So many amazing nuggets that I know our audience will hopefully take into their relationship and apply. I'm going to link in the show notes all of the places, Landis, that people can find you on Instagram, your company website,
Perfect.
so that if you are looking for premarital counseling, help managing wedding planning stress, which sounds like it's actually related to other things. So, truly
Hmm.
premarital counseling,
Yes.
that our audience has access to the resources that you all provide. So, thank you so much for such an enlightening conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast and want more inspiration and guidance, check out our new and improved wedding planning platform at loverly.com, where we offer free wedding planning tools and advice to get you hitched without a hitch. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Loverly. Happy planning!